Welcome to the podcast that's designed to fuel your success in selling technology solutions. I'm your host, Josh Lopresto, SVP of Sales Engineering at Telarus, and this is Next Level Biz Tech. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode. Today, we're talking about cloud, we're talking about Microsoft, we're talking licensing, security, infrastructure, as much as we can possibly pack into 30 minutes. To do this today, though, we have on Sean Ferrel, founder and chairman of Managed Solution, who you may know in the Telarus portfolio. Sean, welcome on, man.
Oh, Josh, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here and excited to give any advice I can.
Love it. Let's talk about you first. I want to hear about your journey. Did you always start out in tech? How did you found this company? How did we get from nothing to here?
Yeah, God, 20 years. We'll just start there. I'm getting old. I wouldn't say the company's getting old. I'm getting old. But I came to San Diego, and yeah, I love tech, but I actually love the business side of running a services organization first. So it was out of school. I mean, I started at, grassroots, living in a dorm, to be honest. And so 20 years later, I'll call it a lot of different evolutions of the company. In short, kind of hitched our wagon, as if you will. I had to look at what was happening in the world with the big guys, Microsoft, with what was happening with the consumer, with Amazon, and what was happening with search with Google. And in the end, when it came to tech, we sort of said, we feel like Microsoft's doing a great job. So fast forward, 2023, we're what's called a highly specialized Microsoft partner. They kind of did away with this concept of gold, and we have to carry thousands of certified people, or I should say certifications within engineering. And it's been a fun journey. I mean, at the end of the day, we're kind of taglining this thing like we want technology to have a positive social impact, because a lot of it doesn't. And so whatever that might be, if it's going to help a human being, we're here to help them.
Love it. So break it down for anybody that is not familiar with Managed Solution. Talk about what you're doing, what your focus is, and we'll get into some of the weeds here in a minute, but break it down at a high level first.
Yeah, I mean, so just think about it simply put. You got two businesses within one organization across the country. So we own a US-based help desk, a true 24-hour a day, level 1, level 2, level 3, very technical help desk. We can work directly with suppliers or I guess manufacturers like Microsoft and Amazon and some of our partners. But that's one thing we do, and we do it for a lot of companies. Typically, mid-market, 100 employees and more. But we have a lot of SMB accounts that we deal with, and we do it within the channel. The other side of that is, for better, sake of consulting, we work with Microsoft directly. So there's 500,000 Microsoft partners in the world, Josh, and in that we're in the top 132, I think, this year. So it's pretty special. So you combine those two things, and really, we're here to point companies in the right direction, technically using Microsoft solutions, and we have some others, and get them where they want to go with their digital landscape, if you will, and then, support it potentially. But sometimes it's, we do both. Sometimes we do one. And then on top of that, we're one of the only providers who can sell with Microsoft their licensing directly. And we're what's called a tier 1 CSP. There's not a lot of those out there either. There's a lot of ones that do distribution through a big partner like a Synex or an Ingram Micro. But we're direct with Microsoft, and we try to bring that to the channel.
Love it. Great stuff. Great explanation too. Maybe let's kick this off here. Before we get into licensing, let's talk a little bit about, remote workforce, managed desktop, right? What are you seeing out there from the customers, right? Is there a huge ask from the managed desktop environments, just this idea of the virtual desktop going forward? What's your opinion there?
Yeah, so the remote workforce is definitely something's going on. I mean, I don't think it's going away. I think that companies are going to, try to figure out how to manage people and culture and all that stuff remotely. But in that, you have to have something that you work through. So whether it's a virtual desktop, a remote desktop, there's a lot of concept around this idea of workspace or workplaces. So like Microsoft has their own product called Microsoft Workplaces, or Azure Virtual Desktop, or Windows Virtual Desktop. Let's not get too confused here today, but there are a lot of options to create that virtual instance, or maybe another word, desktop as a service, using the Microsoft Azure ecosystem.
Yeah, it seems like there was a lot of different flavors out there. Some people use Citrix, some people use this, and then Azure Virtual Desktop comes into the play, and it seems to be one of the simplistic kind of go-forward standards. So thankfully, you guys are right in the middle of supporting that, and it's just we know that. We can help with that. So that's a huge plus.
Yeah, sometimes. And that I will say, it's, well, we can get to it, but I will tell you that it's interesting because one of the things for IT people is whether we're dealing with a virtual desktop environment, it's super important that we understand that not only are you supporting the VDI instance, but really the security and deployment of apps or publishing of apps and all that stuff from the top down, from the cloud to the virtual instance, all the way down to the user. So having more control over that versus having multiple vendors, it helps us out a lot when we support companies.
Yeah. Let's dive in here a little bit from a licensing perspective for a minute. So you mentioned obviously tier 1 CSP, top 100 plus partners. That's a huge deal, right? First of all, kudos to you guys for getting to where you're at. There's a lot of partners in that space. So to be distinguished, I think that means a lot, because that saves us and that saves the partners a lot of work of having to explain. Let me tell you why these guys are important. No, you can speak for it yourself, and I think the accolades speak for it. So let's talk licensing for a minute here. What do you see about some of the misconceptions? I mean, one, it seems like it changes, right? And there's a lot of different options. And I know you guys have a great matrix for it, but talk to me about some of these benefits, misconceptions, how you guys handle licensing and the whole M365 thing.
Yeah. So first step, you got to understand who your partner is. So yes, we're lucky. I mean, we spend a lot of time doing this. We get to deal directly with Microsoft and bring that to the partner channel. So reselling it with Microsoft. So there's tier one, tier one, tier two, and so we're direct. And what we can and can't do. So Microsoft has enterprise agreements, which are sold through major vendors. We call them LSPs, licensed service providers. Unfortunately, we can't be one of those. And then they have a couple of other agreement types, MPSA, we don't have to go into that today, but Microsoft products and services. And then there's CSP, kind of the pay-as-you-go model that I think came after one, we saw, Microsoft SaaSify itself. You could buy what you needed in the cloud, and you could buy Office 365 at the time, or prior to that it was called BPOS.
Mm-hmm.
But evolution-wise, what is confusing, I think, to the channel is we went from traditional, what was called Office 365. And I think where Microsoft started to realize they were short was when they started looking at, we're building security platforms. We're building an operating system that's not consumed in Office 365. We're building, pieces of Azure that people aren't using. So then they kind of changed up the naming convention and created M365 or Microsoft 365, and both still coexist. So when I look at the difference and I talk to partners, the simple way I put it is Office 365, whatever the SKU is, there's a couple of SKUs from basic to, I guess, more business. Those are really your productivity tools. Office, Outlook, Teams, all that good stuff. When I think about M365, I think about the advanced stuff, security with Microsoft Defender. I think about Microsoft, Teams Voice, again, which can be always added on. So that's where a lot of that goes, and including your Windows operating system, Windows 10, Windows 11. So for lack of a better way of putting it, it's a full bundle of Microsoft products.
And the reality in that is that to kind of sum up what you said, as long as the customer isn't required to do an EA, right, meaning this giant enterprise agreement, you guys can help with any of these licensing, anything that a customer needs, correct?
Yeah. Yes. And what I think is unique is even if a customer has an EA, a lot of customers are just trying to, we call it rationalize what they have, how much of each, what they're using. There is a difference in what's called active and purchased licensing. So sometimes customers aren't using subsets of product within a license. So frankly, to help them, why not turn some of those things down or help them, not even purchase the license or the correct license? Because in today's Microsoft SKUs, I think there's over 1,000 SKUs now under the CSP platform. It's a lot to unravel. So we have a full strategic procurement team. They're human beings. They take a lot of calls. It's easy to send in a quotes at Office 365 email, and they'll go through it to really help the customer rationalize what it is they need. And it is a process. And we go directly into the Microsoft portal for that customer to really help them understand, how to best optimize the licensing that they're required.
So if I usually save the what's your favorite questions for partners to ask part of this at the end, but if we pause here for a second and say, all right, if I'm a partner and I'm listening to this and I've now come across you guys and I can expose you to my customers and help them with licensing, what would you recommend, or what would you want to see a partner bring to the table, or how would they go to their customers now that they know that they can help with this?
Yeah. So, I mean, in simple form, we're asking partners to, just ask the customer about their Microsoft overall approach. What are you doing from a licensing perspective, oftentimes? And they'll know if they're more of an enterprise customer, they may say we're involved in an EA. If they say, we're buying it through a provider, a supplier, a distributor, whatever it might be, it's worth taking a look at. I would tell you that the most important question to ask is, what are you leveraging from Microsoft, whether it be Office 365, SharePoint, Teams? We can talk about Viva and the new culture platforms and learning management, but what are you leveraging? And when they start talking about, well, we're thinking about Microsoft security, for example, or Azure, that's where the conversation gets interesting. And that's where oftentimes we get a hold of what they're currently buying licensing wise. And there's a lot of tools sitting in there they're just not using. So it's an exciting conversation for the customer to say, well, I'm paying for all these other things. Why not take advantage of something I may already have? Or it's a simple upgrade to another SKU to, get what I have and replace something else.
Yeah, that's good. Let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about Azure. So, we see a lot of people that made the move into Azure, and now they're deciding, do we keep managing it? Are we optimized? Do we go multi-cloud? What do we do? And obviously there's the concerns around utilization that wasn't expected, right? Runaway IT, all that good stuff. Can you walk me through how you help the customer, whether it's design, optimization, right sizing, when they're either already in an Azure environment or considering moving heavier into an Azure environment?
Yeah, sure. And I think the industry as a whole, we all went wrong in the beginning because a lot of companies came in and said, here's my data center, here's what I have today, servers, hypervisors, whatever it might be. Give me a quote to go to the cloud. Wrong way to do it. So there's this whole adoption framework that we use, and we actually go through some steps with customers to do a lot of data rationalization. Because as data grows, like you said, Josh, that cost, that utility, it's like running the AC in your home, right? It increases. So the name of the game now is looking at the data, understanding the workloads, whether it's a hybrid cloud or it's fully, let's say, ingested into Azure, understanding what should and shouldn't exist in Azure. And then when you look at data optimization, what I mean by that is, where do I actually need the data to live? Is it actually on a hypervisor? Could it live potentially back in like a SharePoint or Teams or a Viva where I don't have those data sets going into a file server in the cloud or a backup in the cloud? There's just a lot to be said about how you make that migration happen and ultimately optimize costs in the end. And Microsoft and us, we have a product called Azure Assure. It's a managed services product offering that does cost optimization. And we're using a lot of the Azure tools. You guys have probably heard of Azure Lighthouse and Azure Monitor. And don't get me wrong, Microsoft doesn't want to lose customers. So they want to help, if they can, optimize your Azure spend. And so we layer on top of that to make sure we're optimizing what customers are doing and give them kind of a full spectrum of cloud management.
So in an extension of that, what about when they get down to the level, let's say we've figured out the licensing, we've right-sized, we've designed what they need. Where does the depth stop for managed solution, right? Are you getting all the way into those migration of the apps, the services? Are you relying on the customer to do dev and PowerShell and all that good stuff? Or tell us, is there a line of demarc there anywhere?
Good question. Because I always tell people Azure is the next level, or cloud is the next evolution of services within. So, I mean, you think, we hear about AI, machine learning, DevOps, BI, data intelligence, analytics. So for managed solution, it's, if you think about old school ways of thinking, so it's infrastructure at first. So you have to move and figure out the right infrastructure, whether it's for the third party app, the core app the customer's developing, all those things. We do all of that, get them there, optimize, continue to manage it if the customer needs that. And then we get into more of the automation and a lot of the, what I would consider app containers, moving apps between the clouds. But where we don't go in that line of demarcation is really into app development. So either the third party that we're dealing with who's developing the app, we work with their teams, but a lot of the customizations for apps is kind of where we draw the line. On the other side, we get into a lot of the cool stuff with what's called Power Platform from Microsoft, which kind of sits on the Azure cloud. So if your business could think of an idea around how to automate some process, and then once that process is automated and there's all this data being shown and you want BI out of it, Power BI, we can do that for you. And a lot of that sits inside of Azure. So you think about it in simple form, data goes into the cloud, the machine learns, the AI learns, it spits it out in BI. We can help in those areas, but I can't help you on the custom development stuff.
Perfect. No, makes total sense. And I don't think a lot of people are familiar with the power. Obviously, we've heard of Power BI, but the whole power of Power Automate and all the automation that can happen there, right? I think you bring up a great question, and I always want people to be able to take back, what's a question I can give to my customers, right? What things are you doing right now manually, and Power Automate, and a lot of those things, so many areas that you can help with that I'm sure you've seen tons of examples there.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is that application development, I mean, truly creating something from scratch these days, you don't necessarily have to do that anymore. There are a lot of, for lack of a better word, widgets, automation tools. If you go into your Office 365 platform and you click on the three little doodads down on the left-hand side, you'll find apps right there that'll automate processes between, I don't know, Google or Dropbox or other applications that you can plug right in, but they're all based on Power Automate and some of the automation tools within the Microsoft platform.
Love it too. And you guys are all obviously uniquely positioned too with Microsoft's big investment into OpenAI and ChatGPT.
Mhm.
That just adds that's going to be its own separate podcast. But yeah, lots of great stuff that's going to come out of that here coming soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, we're excited. They're all about it right now, working a lot with them on the ChatGPT stuff, trying to help companies understand what really is the security behind it. How does it work? How is my data mingled with ChatGPT or OpenAI? But I think, and we'll save it for another time, I think it's going to play a role in automating a lot of things for our businesses, and it's going to help us. So we got to embrace it. I also think we got to look at the things that it may, create some problems for. Like, I don't want my son at school having ChatGPT write his essay. So we'll figure it out, but I'm deep in it right now.
Yeah. Copilot's going to take over the world. I think it's going to
Yeah.
be great.
Yes.
All right, let's talk a little bit about, you bring up security, right? I mean, we've talked of the traditional Microsoft stack, we've talked about Azure, we've talked about migration, we've talked about the Power Apps. What about security? If I'm moving that and I'm leveraging the Azure platform, how do you help from a security perspective? What are the tools? What's the expertise like for the managed solution side there?
Yeah. So I would keep it simple and let the audience, like, Microsoft Defender is a full security platform all the way up through what we call Azure Sentinel or Microsoft Sentinel, which is really the seam in the sock behind Microsoft. So managed solution takes it from soup to nuts, from the device and the user essentially all the way up through the cloud, and using Microsoft Security Center with Azure Sentinel to manage Microsoft security. And I will tell you, there's a lot of tools. And I always start with, in security, it's like people have to drive the process and the process has to drive the technology. So there's a lot of tools that are out there from Microsoft in Defender, from MFAs to EDR solutions, MDR solutions, endpoint detection, threat response, tools. But it's all about the process. And the reason we're so set on Microsoft a lot of the time is because our people can control the narrative when it comes to security. But anything you could think of, compliance, setting up, doing ongoing compliance management for companies, HIPAA, NIST, GDPR, it's all built within that tool set. And it's just a matter of walking the client through what I consider the security framework for Microsoft.
Beautiful. Let's pivot back to one of the things that you mentioned in the beginning, right? We're talking about finding people is hard. So talk to us a little bit about the other side of the business, the staffing, how you're solving for that, and what some of the ways that partners can leverage that.
Yeah. We have full-time recruiters. I'll be the first to tell you, every employee of Managed Solution is truly a full-time employee, and it's been a long road over the years. I mean, with COVID hit, it was obviously a challenge, but it also created some opportunity for us to really expand like we did, a much larger national presence. But what we do, and knowing there's a lack of workforce out there in what we do, it's a highly specialized environment. To find people who have really dove into that public Azure cloud and done it in multiple environments, really hard to find. To find engineers who really understand the bits and bytes of Microsoft Defender and what we call the very various policies that happen within a security suite, and then be able to take that back up top to the business side and explain how this is going to meet the business requirements or the, let's say, auditor compliance requirements. Very, very hard to do. So I would say to you, what we're trying to do with a lot of companies is we do have a staffing arm. We do identify people that maybe, we're not ready to hire at the time, specialists and, BI, as we talked about, or automation, or, have had some Azure experience. And if we can help a customer source somebody, we're happy to do that.
Love it. Yeah, that's huge. I think there's a perfect storm too, especially over the last few years as companies have made layoffs, all of that good stuff. The reality is the businesses that are there need to keep going, and they're now this person that was running IT is being asked to do more with less resources. And so how do we augment that? So I love that you have that as an option for partners. That's killer.
I'll make a comment on that, and that's a really good point. Is there is definitely, I think, a couple things happen. Remote workforces, the internal IT person, I won't say him or her, but they weren't able to support the companies like they were when they were all running down to their desks and helping them. So that meant help desk became big. Companies internalized a lot of help desks, and they were finding that those people grew really quick in their environment and turned over and left because there just wasn't a path past the help desk. So we're finding that outsourcing, especially on the managed services side, has been great. We're also finding that just like anybody, everybody's struggling to find resources, but they also don't necessarily want these project resources on their internal staff full time. So it makes a lot of sense to bring it to companies like ours. And it's a rare thing, I will say this, when you have a lot of engineers who can see the big picture with Microsoft, because there's a lot of moving pieces with all the technology sprawl, versus trying to internalize things and having one or two people who are trying to figure out this global architecture. So there's a lot to it, and it's a difficult thing to solve for.
I love that. Yeah, it's good points. And before I get to kind of the last question here, where we look forward, the future, some great questions for partners. Is there an example that you can call on? And what I like to talk about in this part, or like to draw out, is an environment that you got pulled into. We were told, the partner said, or the customer said this was the problem that they had. And, we got brought in and inevitably we found all these things that we could help with, or maybe it wasn't exactly like we thought it was going to be or what the problem was. And we can leave, customer names and stuff like that out. But is there a good example you can give us of where you walked in, what the experience was like, and kind of what the end result was?
Yeah. We want $1.5 million deal. Actually, the end result was we're working now in the Viva Connections platform from Microsoft with them. But the original ask that we were brought was, we have a customer interested in moving to Office 365 from on-premise, essentially SharePoint, to the cloud, email and all that. And we thought, oh, this is a pretty straightforward migration. We've done 1 million of them. And so next thing you know, we started talking about how we do SharePoint. We realized that, for those of you out there who don't know what Active Directory is, their identity platform was kind of a mess. We got called in to help them with cleaning that up, because that governs, permissions and things like SharePoint and Teams. And then we started to talk with their marketing departments, and I know their CXO level came in at a certain point in SharePoint and said, we're remote now. This happened all during COVID. So we need to figure out digitalizing our culture, how to make a digital culture. And Viva Connections had just launched, and it latches right onto SharePoint. So it grew and it grew and it grew. And we're still in process of working with them on a learning management system, which is in Viva, so the customers can, publish more material because they're remote all over the world.
I love it. I mean, if that's not the staple or the example of go forward, what companies are going to have to deal with if they haven't dealt with it yet, I mean, that's perfect. So what I hope partners pull out of that is, I know you have a lot of prospects and a lot of customers out there that are going to go through and struggle with this. So as we wrap this up, if now I'm a partner that's listened and here we are towards the end of this, and I go, oh my gosh, yes, I want to go talk to my customers, my prospects about this. What are the questions that you give a partner to talk to the customers, or what's the conversation track that you would ask them to go down?
Yeah. I mean, at a high level, I think I identify business problems that technology can solve in the world. I think we do have remote workforces, so that can create challenges with culture. Can Microsoft, like Teams and Viva and all those products, solve for some of those digital cultures that we're trying to create? So ask those business questions like, what are you doing from a compliance perspective? Have you looked at your cyber insurance, and what are they saying that you have to do? Kind of take that down a notch to, how are you leveraging Microsoft from that perspective? Are you leveraging it? Do you have other tools? Oftentimes we start with, the licensing conversation, because I think partners find that there's a lot of untapped resources in those licenses. And then that conversation spins itself back up into, you're sitting on Microsoft Teams for communication. You're sitting on Viva for more collaboration. You can solve for remote workforce automation with a product called Windows Autopilot. So I would start with the business things. Customers want BI. They want intelligence to make better decisions because they don't work together in the office. They want remote workforce solutions, employee lifecycle management. Like, ask them those kind of questions, and then ask them, is Microsoft, and their technologies, are they something you guys are leveraging for this?
Beautiful. All right, final question here as I get to use sound effects and we look out to the future. What do you see changing in this? And maybe it's CoPilot, maybe it's more than that, maybe that is it. But if we just let's look out, I don't know, 12 months or so. Any of the advice that you gave, you think that still applies 12 months from now? Would you ask anybody to be aware or just kind of watch for different things? What's your final thoughts on that, Sean?
Yeah, I think OpenAI and the ChatGPT investment is going to be a big deal. CoPilot, it's coming out. You're going to see it where it's publicly released, and you're going to see a lot of what you're already seeing if you use Microsoft Bing by chance, the artificial intelligence helping tell the story, whether it's embedded in Office 365 and you have a PowerPoint template you're using, ChatGPT will come in there and help you create a sales presentation, automate some of your emails out of Outlook back to, a partner, a customer, a co-employee, automate things that are happening in the cloud that it sees, like auto-scaling cloud servers. I mean, it's just really gonna help enable and automate processes within the business. So I would expect that to be the biggest change we see over the next 12 months.
Love it. Fun stuff, man. Always makes it interesting to be in this space. Sean, that wraps us up, man. I appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, everybody, that wraps us up. Sean Ferrel, founder and chairman at Managed Solution. I'm your host, Josh DePresto, SVP of Sales Engineering at Telarus, and this is Next Level Biz Tech. Till next time.
Next Level Biz Tech has been a production of Telarus Studio 19. Please visit Telarus.com for more information.